I was sipping black coffee from my front porch, boots crossed, shotgun leaning against the rail, when I heard a rumble that shook the gravel beneath my feet. At first, I thought it was thunder rolling in from the west. But it wasn't thunder. It was engines, 3 yellow bulldozers, 2 black SUVs, and a line of trucks with flashing hazard lights, all charging up my long dirt road like they were headed into battle. Behind them, a white van with bold letters, Crescent Pines HOA Enforcement Unit. My name's Buck Hollister, and that was the day the HOA came to take my land. The leader, a short red-headed man in a tight polo shirt and fake badge, stepped out with a loudspeaker and screamed, "You're in violation. This land now belongs to Crescent Pines HOA." Before I could respond, the bulldozers roared to life and lunged forward. I didn't flinch. Why? Because they had no idea who I was, or how badly they just messed up. You see, I'm not just some farmer on a plot of land. I'm the top landowner in the entire county. And what I did next? Well, let's just say bulldozers weren't the only thing about to get crushed. Let's rewind a bit. 3 months before that incident, life on my ranch was as peaceful as it gets. I own 1,600 acres of land in northern Wyoming. I raise free-range cattle, grow winter wheat, and mind my business. Been doing it for 27 years. Folks in town know me. I serve on the Land Zoning Board. I pay my taxes early. I don't cause trouble. But trouble came to me. It started when a shiny brochure landed in my mailbox. Crescent Pines HOA, Expansion Plan 2025. At first, I thought it was some ad campaign. But in fine print, they had mapped my property lines inside a new luxury ranch community project. They were trying to annex my land. I laughed and tossed it in the trash. Surely, someone was confused. After all, I wasn't in any HOA. Or so I thought. A week later, a knock on my door. A woman named Nancy Broyles, tall, bony, with a clipboard like it was her sword, told me I'd missed the mandatory HOA orientation. I told her she was nuts. This land has been mine since my daddy passed it to me. Ain't no HOA ever covered this land, and it never will. She smirked. You might want to check the new zoning overlay, Mr. Hollister. Next thing I knew, I started getting warning letters. First about my barn roof color. Then my cattle fencing. Then about unregistered water use. It didn't make any sense. Until I pulled up the new zoning maps at the county clerk's office. Someone had forged documents showing my land as part of Crescent Pines. And guess who signed the transfer? A county surveyor named Clay Meyerson, who just happened to be the brother-in-law of Crescent Pines HOA President Rick DaCosta. You see where this is going? A few days later, while I was at the feed store, 2 men in suits were snooping around my ranch. My neighbor Jesse saw them taking pictures of my sheds, my tractor, even my chicken coops. They left behind a bright pink notice nailed to my gate. Notice of compliance required. Failure to remove unauthorized structures will result in HOA seizure and demolition under Community Code 48B. I called the sheriff. Sheriff Tom's been a good friend for years. He came by, read the notice, and said, "Buck, this is bogus. But you need to fight it right. Let's not give them a reason to escalate." I agreed, until I saw tire tracks by my creek the next morning, deep ones, from heavy equipment. They were scouting my property. That's when I knew this wasn't just a legal mess. It was a land grab, and they were moving fast. For a few days, I kept it low. I called some old friends, county board members, a retired judge, even a state land assessor. I compiled every deed, plat map, and affidavit I had. I stayed polite, professional, but deep down I was boiling. I've spent my entire life building this ranch. My blood, sweat, and tears are in every fence post, every corral, every grain of dirt. My wife and I raised our sons here. I buried my dog under that big oak tree near the West Ridge. This land is my legacy. And these HOA clowns thought they could steal it? Not on my watch. The night before the bulldozers came, I spotted movement at the edge of my property. 3 trucks. 1 SUV. Men in reflective vests and hard hats were measuring and spraying orange lines on my pasture. Trespassing. I walked out with my flashlight and my German Shepherd, Duke. One of the men flashed a badge. Fake. said they were authorized by Crescent Pines HOA to begin demolition at 8 a.m. I warned them, you step 1 foot past that fence tomorrow, you'll be trespassing on the private land of the county's top landowner. He laughed. You're not on top anymore, old man. Times change. I nodded. Sure. But the law doesn't. They left. But I stayed up that night, reviewing everything, making calls, preparing, because I knew by morning they'd bring the storm, and I'd be ready. So there I was, at sunrise, standing on my porch as the bulldozers lined up like tanks. Nancy Broyles stepped out of one SUV, now dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, sunglasses on, lips tight. She gave a curt nod. Then, from a loudspeaker on the lead bulldozer, "This is your final notice, Mr. Hollister. Vacate the property or face immediate removal." My hands didn't shake, because just behind me was the surprise they didn't expect. I called out, "You want this land? Come and get it." Then I raised my walkie and said one word into the receiver, "Now." And what happened next made every last one of them freeze in place. The moment I said "now" into the walkie, a loud thud, thud, thud echoed through the sky. Everyone, including the bulldozer drivers, looked up. A black county helicopter swooped in low over the tree line and circled once. Then 3 black SUVs pulled up from behind my barn, flanking the Crescent Pines vehicles. One by one, doors swung open, and out stepped county marshals, land commissioners, and my personal lawyer, Dennis Clyde, wearing his cowboy hat like it was a badge of honor. Dennis walked right past the stunned HOA crew and said, "Buck, we got your injunction signed, sealed, and approved at dawn." He held up a thick file of documents. "Effective immediately. No one on this land has any right to enforce anything, and anyone who tries can be arrested for trespassing on private, federally protected farmland." One of the marshals approached the bulldozer operator and said in a firm voice, "Turn it off. Now." And they did. They didn't just shut the engines down. They left them running idle and walked away with their hands raised. Nancy Broyles and Rick DaCosta stood frozen. Nancy's lip trembled. Rick tried to step forward. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, smiling nervously. Dennis chuckled. "No, Rick. The misunderstanding was thinking Buck Hollister was just another farmer. He's the largest registered landholder in the county, and the biggest donor to the courthouse your brother-in-law used to work in. And that," Dennis pointed at the forged zoning map Rick had filed, "is felony fraud." Suddenly, Rick bolted. He sprinted toward the black SUV. They came in. But my old ranch hand, Tom Jr., a 6 feet 5 inches former Marine, stepped in his path and calmly said, "Going somewhere?" Rick skidded to a stop. Sheriff Tom arrived seconds later, lights flashing. "You're under arrest, Rick, and we're reopening all zoning cases you signed off in the past 2 years." He slapped cuffs on him right there. But while Rick was dragged to the patrol car, Nancy Broyles was already dialing someone fast on her phone. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes? Still cocky. She muttered, "We're not done here." Later that afternoon, Dennis came back with Sheriff Tom and a folder filled with more documents. "You need to see this, Buck." Inside were maps, not just of my land, but of 6 other nearby ranches. Apparently, Crescent Pines HOA had been slowly expanding by targeting older ranchers with limited resources or no family to help them fight back. In 3 cases, they succeeded. The landowners had no money to hire legal support, so they caved. But my case? It had backfired. And now the county was opening a formal investigation into HOA land fraud, something that hadn't happened in decades. Even the local news showed up. Channel 6 News aired a report that night. "Top landowner stops illegal HOA bulldozer seizure. Corruption scandal unfolds." The comments flooded in. "That man's a hero. Good on him for standing his ground. HOAs are out of control." But just when I thought it was over, something strange happened. The following week, I got a visit from the IRS. They claimed someone had tipped them off, that I was underreporting my farm revenue. My books were clean, of course, but it was enough to delay my harvest prep for almost a week. Then one of my irrigation lines was mysteriously slashed open. Then my cattle feed delivery never showed up, canceled by request, they said. I knew what was happening. Nancy Broyles wasn't arrested. She was still out there, working in the shadows. And she was playing dirty. So I dug into hers. Maggie's cousin works for a private research firm in Cheyenne. We asked her to run a background check. Turns out, Nancy was once sued for HOA harassment in another state. She changed her name and relocated 2 years ago. Her real name? Amanda Reese. And get this. She wasn't a licensed zoning officer. She was a freelance consultant, contracted by HOA boards to find legal loopholes in property expansions. In short, she was a professional land thief. And she'd set her eyes on me. One night, around 2 a.m., Duke, my German Shepherd, started barking like mad. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and saw a black pickup truck speeding away from my front gate. They'd tried to rip out my property boundary sign, and they left something behind. A red spray-painted message on the wooden post. This ain't over. I ran my hand over the paint, and right then I realized this wasn't just about land anymore. This was war. The morning of the zoning hearing, I woke up early, washed my face with cold water, and stared at myself in the mirror longer than usual. The photo of my grandson sat in my coat pocket, folded twice, right next to my grandfather's lucky silver dollar. I wasn't scared. I was angry. Nancy had crossed a line you don't come back from. And now, the entire county would hear the truth. The meeting was held at the county civic hall, and the place was packed. Farmers, small landowners, even curious townsfolk. Everyone knew something big was about to go down. 5 zoning board members sat at the long table up front, each with their name plaques and microphones. I sat in the center seat. Nancy Broyles strolled in 10 minutes late. This time, she wore a bright red power suit, her makeup sharp, and a smug grin pasted on her face. She locked eyes with me like this was a game. But it wasn't. This was my home. The hearing opened with her attorney, a sleek, fast-talking man named Bryce Henley, spinning lies so fast it nearly twisted the ceiling fans. He said, my land had been voluntarily zoned into Crescent Pines via old deeds. The HOA was offering beautification, order, and property value increases. That I had been aggressive and even threatened field surveyors with a weapon. The audience murmured. Some gasped. I leaned forward and calmly said, I've got video of that night. I never even chambered around. I passed a flash drive to the clerk. The projector lit up. And there, in crisp black and white night footage, were 2 masked men removing my fence and running off like thieves in the dark. Gasps filled the room again, but this time they weren't for me. Then I pulled out my second ace. And here's a notarized letter from the original land surveyor, Clay Meyerson. He says his signature was forged. That's when Nancy's smile twitched for the first time. Suddenly, my neighbor Jessie stood up. Mr. Chairman, may I speak? The board nodded. She stepped forward and told her story, how the HOA sent her a fake violation for having too many sunflowers, then threatened to sue. Then Gary followed. He pulled out 2 letters warning him about goat noise infractions and unpaid dues he never agreed to. One by one, members of the Ridge Valley 10 stood up. They all shared how the HOA used intimidation, false zoning, and forged overlays to pressure them. Even folks I didn't expect, like the shy widow from down near Cedar Creek, spoke up about HOA agents appearing on her land unannounced. It was no longer just my fight. It had become a community revolt. Just when it looked like the tide had turned, Nancy stood up and said, Your Honor, if I may. She walked to the microphone slowly. I have a signed declaration, she said, from someone very close to Mr. Hollister, stating he admitted to lying about his land ownership. She held up a sealed envelope with a dramatic flair. This is from his own son. The room went silent. I was even stunned. I hadn't spoken to my son, Raymond, in 3 years. He'd left the ranch to become an accountant in Denver. We didn't part on good terms, but I never imagined he'd betray me like this. The board paused the hearing for a 10-minute recess. I stepped outside alone, and for the first time in this fight, I felt doubtful. Had she really gotten to my own blood? I was staring at the parking lot pavement when a gray sedan pulled up fast. Out stepped a man in a suit, briefcase in hand. My jaw dropped. It was Raymond. He looked tired. His tie was crooked, his hair messy like he'd driven all night. "Dad," he said out of breath, "they forged that letter. That isn't my signature." He handed me a folder. Inside were original notarized documents, land receipts, and an affidavit he'd submitted to a Denver legal team. I caught wind of what was going on. Nancy tried to contact me a few weeks ago. When I refused to play along, I guess they faked it. I stared at my son for a long second, then hugged him tighter than I had in years. We went back into the hearing, side by side. Back inside, Raymond took the mic. "I'm Raymond Hollister, son of Buck Hollister. This is my affidavit. Anything Nancy Broyles just submitted is a complete fabrication." The board reviewed the signature, compared it to real legal docs. One member whispered, "They don't match at all." Nancy's lawyer began to panic. She whispered furiously to Bryce. Chairman Lowell banged his gavel. "Order. This board is ready to vote on whether Crescent Pines HOA's zoning overlay claim over the Hollister farm is valid." The room held its breath. Board Member Sampson? No. Board Member Harper? No. Board Member Crane? No. They kept going. All 5 votes unanimously ruled in my favor. But just as people started clapping, Sheriff Tom stormed into the room, flanked by 2 deputies. "Hold your applause. We've got a warrant to execute." Everyone turned to look at Nancy. She froze. Tom raised a piece of paper. "Nancy Broyles, also known as Amanda Reese, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, trespassing, and endangering a minor." Nancy looked at me with wild eyes. "This isn't over," she shouted as she was cuffed. But I calmly stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, it sure is." Or, at least, I thought it was, until we discovered what else she'd been hiding. After Nancy was hauled off in cuffs, the county hearing turned into a celebration. Folks cheered, shook my hand, and clapped me on the back. Raymond and I stood near the podium, side by side again after all those years. It felt like the storm had passed. But Sheriff Tom had a strange look on his face. He walked up to me and whispered, "Buck, we found something in Nancy's office. You're going to want to come see this." I followed him outside to one of the deputy cruisers. The trunk was open. Inside were 3 black binders marked Operation Expansion, Phase 1, Targeted Farms and Weak Owners, Pressure Files, Leverage, and Blackmail. Tom opened the first binder. What I saw nearly made my knees buckle. Inside were photos, hundreds of them. Aerial photos, property lines, family members, security systems, vehicles. Every detail about me, my neighbors, our land, and even our weaknesses. There was even a folder labeled Hollister Ranch, Primary Obstacle. Neutralize via financial, legal, or family strain. I flipped to the back. A photo of Duke. She had even documented my dog as a threat. Later that night, Raymond and I sat by the fireplace back at the ranch. I poured us each a cup of black coffee, and we tried to make sense of it all. He looked pale. "I got a text on the drive home, Dad." He passed me his phone. It was an anonymous number. "You should have stayed out of Wyoming. You brought the storm to your father's door. Next time we won't miss." I felt the heat drain from my body. Nancy wasn't acting alone. She was part of something bigger. Tom came back the next morning with FBI agents in tow. Apparently, after Nancy's arrest, they connected her aliases to a network of fake HOA schemes operating across multiple states. They'd been targeting older landowners, rezoning property behind their backs, and then reselling the land to developers. All without the original owners ever knowing. The name of the hidden network? The Granite Coalition. And Crescent Pines was just one cell of the operation. I wasn't just a local victim. I was the first person who ever exposed them. And now the feds needed my help. They wanted me to testify, to share every letter, every threat, every dirty trick Nancy had used. I agreed. But I had one condition. You leave my neighbors out of this. You make sure they're protected. and you bring every last one of those snakes to justice. A few days later, I woke up to something eerie. Painted on my barn door in bold red spray paint were the words, 1 down, 3 to go. I froze. Was it a warning, a threat, or a promise? Sheriff Tom increased patrol around my land. Raymond took a leave of absence from his job in Denver to stay and help protect the family. Maggie locked the doors every night and kept the shotgun beside the couch. The land was safe for now. But peace didn't come easy. One bright Saturday, I got a knock on my door. It was Jessie, with a dozen other neighbors behind her. "We've had enough of hiding," she said. "We want to build a legal defense fund for anyone targeted by this granite coalition." They brought signs, files, receipts, and more stories. Even folks from 3 towns overjoined. We called a town meeting at the Civic Center and formed the Land Freedom Alliance. I was elected chair by a unanimous vote. We weren't just protecting ourselves now. We were creating a wall they'd never break through. But just as things were starting to settle, Raymond went to pick up groceries from town and never came back. I called his cell. No answer. An hour passed. Then 2. Then a text came through from that same block number. "We warned you. Back off, or you'll bury your son next to that dog." I dropped the phone. I called Tom, and he sent out a bolo, "Be on the lookout." I got in my truck and started driving down every back road I knew, heart pounding, breath tight, because this time, they'd made it personal. The moment I got that text, I knew time was against me. Sheriff Tom put out an Amber Alert even though Raymond was an adult. The FBI got involved immediately, since the Granite Coalition had already been flagged for interstate crimes. I didn't wait around. I hit the road. I checked every gas station, rest stop, backwoods trail, and ranch property across 3 counties. I stopped only to drink from my thermos and refill the tank. On the 3rd day, I noticed a strange pattern. Old Crescent Pine surveillance routes had all been near abandoned grain silos, including one listed in Nancy's binder. And that's where I headed. When I reached the silo, I parked half a mile out and approached on foot, staying low. I had my walkie on, my shotgun slung across my back, and Duke trotting quietly at my side. I spotted a white van near the rear of the silo, with Crescent Pine's logos scrubbed off, but faint outlines still showing. I whispered into my radio, "Tom, I've got a visual. Stand by." I crept up and peeked through a cracked board in the silo wall. Inside, Raymond was there, tied to a chair. Alive, bruised, but breathing. And next to him was another man I didn't recognize. Older, wearing ranch boots, with a face hardened by experience. He had a gag in his mouth and was cuffed to a beam. That's when I realized they hadn't just taken my son. They were collecting threats. People who had exposed their fraud. This was bigger than I thought. I didn't wait for backup. I snuck around the back, smashed open a small window with my knife handle, and tossed in one of my old smoke flares from my military days. Smoke filled the air fast. From the front, the captors ran outside coughing, confused. That's when I burst through the back, with Duke barking like a wild animal. I took down the first man with the butt of my shotgun. The second ran, but didn't make it far. He tripped over a tire stack and caught Duke right behind him. I cut Raymond loose first. He grabbed the keys off one of the unconscious men and freed the other hostage. His name? Richard Malloy, a former land commissioner from Texas, taken weeks ago while testifying in a similar HOA case. This was no coincidence. Once the FBI arrived and secured the area, they uncovered hidden laptops and cell phones that hadn't been wiped yet. On them, a map. It showed every small-town expansion plan the Granite Coalition was working on. Over 42 HOA shell organizations had been created in 10 different states. Their goal? Take control of undervalued rural land. Push out older owners. Sell to corporations for 10 times the price. They called it Project Suburban Dominion. And it wasn't just legal manipulation anymore. They were using intimidation, abduction, and threats. The agents looked at me and said, "You've just helped us take down one of the most corrupt property rings in the country." 2 weeks later, the town gathered at the county fairgrounds. Sheriff Tom held a town meeting so packed. Folks had to stand on bales of hay just to see the stage. Raymond and I stood together as the state governor's office awarded us the state honor for civil bravery. I wasn't one for speeches, but they handed me the mic. I looked out over the crowd, neighbors, friends, even folks I didn't know who had been following our story. And I said, "This land means more than money. It's where we raise our families, teach our kids right from wrong, and help neighbors when they're down. And if anyone thinks they can take it from us, they'll learn the hard way what we stand for out here." The crowd roared. People cried. Raymond smiled with pride in his eyes. And Maggie, from the front row, mouthed 2 words. "You won." But just when I thought it was all over, a plain white envelope arrived in the mailbox. No return address. No postmark. Inside, 1 sentence typed in red ink. "The granite doesn't crack. It buries." And a photo. A blurry image of my barn taken from the woods just 2 nights ago. I walked back inside, set the envelope on the table, and locked the door behind me. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. Because this time, I wasn't standing alone. I had my family, my neighbors, the FBI, and the entire county on my side. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. But this time, they'd be the ones losing land.